Welcome to the continuation of the series. Hopefully everyone's getting a lot of value out of it. I'm Ryan Cahalane. I'm one of the EIRs here at the Industry 4.0 Accelerator. I help customers find, deal with technology, and sometimes not deal with technology if that's not what they need. My day job is I'm a consultant and help small and medium customers figure out the best way to apply technologies and try to make a difference in their operations. So the discussion topic today is really how to make sense out of all of the stuff that you see here and who to trust as you go on the smart manufacturing journey. There's a lot of noise in the system. You know, if you're a Ford, you've got a team of 50 that are sitting there thinking nothing but how to deal with this. If you're not Ford, you may have a person who is doing this part-time, or you may have no one doing this. And you're also hearing a whole lot of noise. Everyone's telling you Industry 4.0, smart manufacturing, you've got to be doing something. What are you doing? Generative AI, and all you're trying to do is just stay in business and make a bit of money and be around for the next generation. So you used to be able to go to a pretty consistent advisory base, you know, your distribution network, you know, someone like Kendall, your machine builder that you've trusted and bought lots and lots of machines from. Maybe a systems integrator that knows your operation at least as well or maybe better than you do. But now you've got software companies telling you, oh, you don't need any of that stuff. Just sprinkle a little of this fairy dust and everything will get better. You've got the IT organizations that are now coming down. It's getting, you know, a little bit messy. And who should you trust as you're going through this journey? So I'm joined on stage with a hand-picked selection of experts.
Does that mean you touched each one of us?
It's already going downhill. These guys represent a lot of domain expertise and also come from a little bit of each of those categories that I mentioned. So you've got Dan Goss, and I'm going to let each one of them kind of give their backgrounds and tell us a little bit about what they do. But Dan Goss, who is a enterprise software sales executive, done a lot of work in different areas, now independent and for hire if you're willing to be touched. Rob Simmons, who is a control systems integrator, business development for Sandalwood, a Michigan, based here in Michigan, also have offices in Canada and Mexico. You have John Hagan, who is with Ambe Engineering, a turnaround specialist operations consultancy, who is now being enabled by a bunch of new tools and technologies that allows them to be more effective and more immediate with their solutions. So not just strategy and how to improve your operations, but they can actually come in and do technology implementation. And Mr. Goodenough, Dave, sorry, from Edgewater Automation here in St. Joe, Michigan, a longtime machine builder and expert in a whole lot of industries. So with that, why don't I turn to you, Dan, and tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of go down the road.
I got into software. I had an opportunity to do a startup, and I've always just been a sales guy and got the opportunity to create a business around collecting data from pig and poultry farms, and literally went out and got my hands dirty and realized I needed a low to no code platform to help me do that, because while I bought the Python for Dummies book and I can write Python like a dummy, nobody would hire me to do it. So the low to no code platform was appealing. I used that to build a business. It accelerated my business. And then I went on to sell that business and went to work for that platform provider and have been successful selling that platform over the past few years.
Rob?
So I started out in operations, was in steel and urethanes production, and as I resolved internal management system solutions and ended up contracting so much software to solve our problems, I started my own software company. And so that got me into that world of IoT software, providing the software. And from there, that company came and went, and now I'm in the services business. So we do IoT systems, MES systems, but we also have other practices we do systems engineering, we do ergonomics. And what's interesting about what Ryan was talking about, and hopefully we talk about today some, is I do think it's a changing landscape, because before our practices were isolated. There's ergo discipline over here, there's software here, and I think what's happening now is a convergence, and everything's bumping into each other. So you put in camera technology, but now you're getting into cognitive issues with your workers and information overload. And you put in IoT systems, but it's bumping up against your automation throughput. So I do think it's going to be an interesting discussion about what the convergence is doing, and for our firm, we're seeing that a lot.
Yeah, so I come more from engineering, technical, and operations, not software-based. So as Ryan said, I come from professional services, consulting, mostly focused on crisis turnaround, logistics, quality. But now in that consulting world where it was always heavily focused on processes and how do you check your processes, now we're partnering with companies like my partners that are up here, but now integrating the technology into that. Let us fix the foundation of what's going on. Let us integrate the technology and automation. And how do we then take what's going on in the factories today to the next level to stay competitive on a global basis? So
I'm a oddball, I guess, too, because I actually started out as an apprentice, and I learned how to build machines, and I built machines down in a company that I started in with 43 years ago now. So I've been in custom automation for that whole time. Built machines for 10 years, then worked my way into engineering. I actually started designing machines at that point. I got to become manager. I brought everybody into SolidWorks, into the 3D world. I then started doing a little bit of programming on PLCs. I then got more machine design time, and I've just seen machine designed a lot of different custom automation. And then like, okay, I got to try something new. So now I'm doing into sales and trying to help my background helpfully bring a aspect to bringing custom automation into a factory that doesn't have one. How do you bring it up from the beginning? If a customer we go into doesn't have any at all, which seems to be a lot these days, how do we get to that thing started? How do you get them to learn how to, I need to have a good maintenance guy that can understand how to train a robot. How can we help them get to that training of that type of stuff? It's all boiling down to the people at the start point. The other customers, that companies that are always into the automation already, they have a base in that already. So you got to look at different companies. As I go into different companies and look at all this stuff, you have to look at what's in the place already and how you need to approach getting to that point. Do I need to talk to one of these guys to help through that point? There's a lot of things that we can get to that point, but understanding that first base when we meet them, that's my goal and my role right now.
So how do you stay, and this question I guess Dave for you is, as you start to learn new skills and as you start to cross the swim lanes, if you will, how do you stay relevant? How do you understand where you end and the next guy begins, and how do you know when to hand that off with a customer so that everyone wants to retain account control, if you will, and not for nefarious reasons, just to make sure that your customer is getting the right advice.
That's a good question, Ryan, and it's a hard one to actually filter out at times too. But at the same time, you can only get so much to where you get the expertise that you can get in-house, and you can get that to where you all get to the point to where we actually have to go to move on to the next job, right? So you got to try to start looking at that next level person. If you want to try working with one of these guys, we're all open for doing stuff like that, to be really honest with you. So there's some things that you can actually get to think about, okay, well, you guys need this up going into the MES stuff or doing into the next portion of it. We'll help you get to that point, but to control it, to keep it moving, to keep it after we leave, I mean, because we're going to leave and we're going to train you up to that point. You're going to be able to have to do it. How do you get to that point? And, you know, you always try to get a service department. Once again, people trying to hire people and all that stuff, we're probably all having to deal with it. Everyone here is probably having to deal with how do you hire the right people? How do you get to that point? So where that also ties into that, who's going to handle that next level stuff, right?
Yeah, I always find that in those situations, it's best to set clear expectations on who's doing what where, even if the handoff is fuzzy. Hey, we'll give you guys a hand, but we're not hooking it up to your MES, right? Like there's a clear demarcation point there.
Right.
So nobody's wondering 2 weeks later, hey, why isn't it hooked up to the MES? And nobody knew that it was supposed to be.
Right.
It's best, I think, to over-communicate in those situations.
Right, and we've done that before with other customers that, you know, they've got an MES, and we've found an MES partner that actually took that, had worked with us through the process up to that point, and then that's the marriage that you have to worry about, that you work in.
That answer your question?
Yeah. So I got one last question, and I have some canned questions that I'm going to go through, but if anyone in the audience wants to ask, please feel free to cut us off or keep us on track. We're liable to go off the rails. So as a machine, as a machine builder, one of the classic issues is you run into machine builders that aren't open, that don't want their code to be used by other people. And are you one of them?
No.
All right.
No.
You can buy from them.
No. My take on all that is, and this is just a personal basis, right?
Yep.
Is first of all, you paid for all the engineering, right? The second thing is you have to then staff the people to be able to take on top of that with that stuff. Going back to the labor market of, you know, we have to train up all our guys. We try to get them from all aspects, you know, in entry-level college, right out of high school. I'm a mentor on a FIRST robotics team, and there was this one kid right here. He was actually on our FIRST robotics team. He now works for us. Been a year now that he done. We pulled him right out of high school. He's working for us. He's doing controls engineering. So custom automation is all about not so much the equipment, but it's the people behind it that actually makes that work. So if you don't have the right partnership with the team inside, then that outside goes. So you're building on that. So the more you have to, you got to help our customers. They got to be able to run the machine. So not giving them that stuff is just more work for us that we need to worry about, right?
So I have a question for you guys or anybody out here. In my perspective, and maybe it's the projects we're on, but it seems like that the technology, whether it's hardware or software, is getting simpler to implement. Low code, pre-assembled modules, but the project implementation is getting more complicated. More stakeholders, more systems. Do you find the same impression on the projects you're involved in?
I wouldn't say that the hardware and software are simpler or less complex, but I do agree that the overall implementations are way more complicated because of all of the new stakeholders that don't have traditional integration exposure. Businesses are now paying much more attention to how projects are going, and they're refining implementation plans as they go on the fly, and then nobody agrees on how value's assessed and perceived, so there's There's influence from business folks instead of engineering that.
Sorry, I'm jumping in again.
No, go ahead.
So, I mean, the other thing too is I think you can buy more, in custom automation, you really need to try to find out stuff that you can integrate. That's what we do the most of. We try to build as less as we can so I can go find that stuff, because the bottom line is everybody wants to just go that much faster. They want to get to that end gate a lot faster. So the more we can buy, the better the programming is, the more CAN systems you can start with. You're going to have a better throughput, faster, quicker, through that time point. That's our take on a lot of this stuff too. So that startup to the end, when I started this stuff, a $10 million project would have taken you 3.5 years. That's down to a year now, right? Yeah. So the technology has driven us down to faster time frames. It's not like it's making it any easier. It's just making it go faster. It's making it easier to get to that point, but then you have to react faster. You have to have a team in place to do that.
I'm going to jump in on the consulting side there then for a minute, because I think what you said is correct, and we're dealing with customers that are saying, hey, I can't produce enough fast enough, but I went out and bought this X $1 million piece of technology, right? Or I automated these lines, but what they didn't do was a little bit what Dan said a minute ago. They didn't define the strategy. They didn't talk about what are their objectives, whether it's OEE, whether it's cost, whether it's quality. And now they put in this expensive system that's running fast, and because they didn't fix the foundational, make a plan that it was clear and definitive, and they didn't go through and look at their processes before they implemented that technology, now all they did was really make their inefficiencies high speed. And so, you have high speed lines, some that are running, 1-3 second cycle times in some of our world that now shut down, every minute, every few minutes because the foundational work wasn't done. So yeah, you have a $50 million, $100 million line, but you're running at like a 30% OEE because you didn't do any of the groundwork that you needed.
And my perspective on that, on the front side, the timeline for the technology has shortened dramatically, but they still work organizationally where they didn't use Scrum, they didn't front load everything, and that creates those disconnects later.
And a lot of times, we base everything on 85 OEE, 85% OEE. That's kind of like world standard, right? So with that being said, if we don't ship unless we hit OEE 85%. But with that being said as well, we don't get a scope of work right up front either. We're having to develop that scope of work with the customer, working as a partnership, trying to understand what the piece parts is. Can they be first of all automated, right? Do they have a lead that can be put in that can pick and place and go to that point? Do I got to get a big bulk of bag of stuff and throw it into something and make it sort? There's a lot of things that you got to think of up front. That how do I take that chunk of metal or pieces and put them into a spot to where I can pick it with a robot one at a time without doing a lot of vision. So now you're looking at the skill level at that point saying, all right, if I got to put vision in here, do they have the skill level to do it? We look at that stuff as we're going and say, well, we probably ought to figure out a better way to just mechanically locate this.
I like what you said about working with your customers as a partner to develop the scope of work. And it's really inferred if you're going to put a new piece of technology on your floor that is a machine that you've built out of your shop, that there's going to be new buttons and new levers and new dials to turn. Oftentimes in my world, when you deploy new software, there's a software sales guy and a software sales team that come in and show technology and prove the value, and then it's put in overnight. The next day the people show up and there's new software and everybody goes, what's that?
Where's the old stuff?
Where's my button? and there's been no real appreciation for, hey, we're going to have new software. Of course, I'm overcomplicating the story, but there's no attention paid to what the change management looks like. Now I have more data, now I have more influence, but the organization hasn't been told anything about hey, here's what you're going to do with this new data. Like, if I can predict my downtime, like, shouldn't I schedule my orders around that downtime? And,
Right.
that's a different way of thinking about things other than running to fail.
Right.
So have you seen the impact in any of your customers from all of the state and federal funding and attention that's being pushed down as far as smart manufacturing, Industry 4.0? There's grants here in Michigan that will help people. There's grants in other states. Kind of back, and maybe I'll start with you, John. Are you seeing people that are just buying equipment, and maybe it's because they're being incented, or buying software solutions or otherwise, and don't know what to do with it, or is it?
Yeah, I think what you're saying is correct. I think because of Industry 4.0 and everything that's going on around AI, everyone assumes if I have an issue, I'm going to be able to buy technology or automate it and it's going to fix the issue, right? But I think the basis of what we were just discussing still applies. Is there's not the work being done developing channel partners up front to go in and successfully integrate this stuff, right? You have consultants like myself that come in and say, okay, did you do the process? What are your processes? And then we have a machine builder that says, well, my machine can do this, and you have a software person that says, well, if you now bolt this together, but they're all acting in silos, right? They're not tying together. And so we're seeing issues around, again, what Dan just said with lack of training. We're watching customers that are buying like, well, this is the latest software we should need. It's the hottest software. But forgetting about the fact that you didn't train your people up front. You now have lines that are running. Also ignoring the fact that a lot of the people that are working on these lines now aren't native English speakers. And I'm seeing out-of-the-box code that is complex with dual meanings, opposite meanings, that even with my experience, I stand in front of an HMI and go, what does that really mean? But yet we're asking someone that may speak another language completely to do that. So it's like the upfront planning is becoming more and more critical as the technology and funding becomes easier to obtain.
Any other thoughts on the stated incentives or the push, or is it kind of universal that you've seen just adoption of tech for tech's sake?
I mean, talking about like grants and stuff like that, we've actually had to work because a state said, hey, we're going to give you this much money if you can prove you're going to automate something, right?
Yeah.
And we've done a couple jobs that we've worked with a customer basically one way or the other, trying to help them describe the process before they even buy it to where we could do that point. So there's I've seen stuff like that, and maybe not to the lower respects of like this areas where you guys are talking about, but just to buy a machine. State comes in, giving you $250,000. What can you buy for that? I don't know, Dave. What can you buy for that, right? Well, let's see. We can do this, this, and this.
Tell them what they've won.
We got to get into it, right? So it's stuff like that. You really got to start thinking about it. Is how do you drive that? How do you help that customer get to that point? Then going back to how do I train them up to get to that point, right? After you get the machine, it's one thing to have it or an assembly process, and this is custom for you want. And I keep telling people every time I go and install, I always talk to the operators on the line. I go, this is a story I went way back. I said, you're pretty privileged right now. You're working on a one-of-a-kind machine in the whole world. I mean, this piece of equipment is meant just for you guys, right? Because if you don't get the operators on board first, the guy tier up's going to get an earful, the guy at that's going to get an earful, we're going to get a big old earful at the end, right? So they all got to understand that you're working on a prototype piece of equipment, and it's not a toaster. I can't put bread in, push toast, and brown toast comes up. It's not that way. There's going to be issues. There's going to be bugs. How do you train through them? How do you get the maintenance team in pot? That type of stuff is where you really need to go. How do you get the next phase of these guys or consulting to actually help that upfront stuff to start helping our process go a little bit better?
That's a big passion for our team too. One of our mantras is human-centered design, and the more advanced the system or process, the more investment you need to make to the floor and the operators and see it through their eyes. And that's kind of the irony of all this technology, is it's putting more emphasis on the human operator than ever before. And that really, our belief is that is the constraint of the system you need to design around, is your folks on the floor.
Are you guys, in your role as a control systems integrator, and I come from that space, so I feel for you. You used to be the one to trust. You know, often you were the one to pull it all together. Often you're the one that introduces technology to the customer at the right pace. You may even be involved in some of the planning aspects around, like, should we buy a new piece of equipment? Do you see that changing? And do you see customers that are now relying on other influences, people like the other gentleman around you, or some of the IT consultancies that are showing up? And you know, what would you say as an integrator? Like,
well, I'll turn it back to you as an influence on me and us. But for us, we wrestle with, are we a service provider or are we a reseller, right? We really prefer to be agnostic and viewing it through the customer's eyes, but that's rare to get that engagement. You're usually meeting someone because you are an experienced implementator of a particular technology. So it's an irony. And ideally, I would assume for us and what we do, we'd rather be the Sherpas helping doing the shopping. But typically when we come in, they're already committed to a machine, they're already committed to a software. So we're going to work it out. Do you find the same situation?
Absolutely. You either, to the point earlier, you've made some decision, whether it's fueled by the state or fueled by just, we need to make a change, we need to get more production capacity. The easiest way to do that is just buy some more equipment and go faster, or you're replacing a person that just left with a robot because that really is your only option to get the workforce. So I'm seeing a lot of, I would call it almost reactive decision making, where you're changing because the business keeps changing on you. And I've had the same experience where I wish I could tell the customer, slow down, think about what you're about to do. Maybe call John first. And it's really interesting to hear the perspectives. Every one of you is actually saying much the same thing. Be open, be collaborative, share. I love that Dave's open mindset as far as machines. Like that makes such a difference even downstream in terms of how you support the equipment, how you build knowledge around the equipment. That should be the first checkbox. If you've got a machine that may be the best in the world, but if that isn't going to be open, if you're not going to be able to connect it, go find someone else. So yeah, I see the same thing. I feel there's a big risk in that the IT domain is coming down, and they may not understand how the floor works. And I guess that's a good question for our software friends. In the end, you have the ear of the CIO. You have the ear of the people that sign the bigger checks. You have people that are really, really trained at how to close a deal. And your goal is to sell. Your goal is to push software or push whatever enterprise solution on a customer. Do you see that as being problematic? Do you see where would you get your trust in terms of
There needs to be adult supervision on the pool. There's time for everybody to go figure out what's happening. If you leave any project, whether it's a machine or a software implementation, to its own devices, it'll run on forever. The scope will creep. Feelings will get hurt because things get thrown on and off the boat. It will. All the things that happen in bad projects happen because there wasn't somebody there with experience to say, no, hey, we're not doing that.
Yep.
And typically when you get to senior management or a C-suite, they have 100,000-foot focus and don't want to be bothered with the pesky details. And the pesky details are often things like the culture change required to adopt technology, not just we've installed it, I don't know why they're not using it. We kind of joked about telling the story about the plant that had pitted one line against the other with KPI boards and didn't really have any respect for the culture in the plant. And these guys were, they were hired out of like the parole program, and it literally ended in a riot situation in the parking lot because they had told line A to compete with line B, and whoever won a prize, and nobody considered that there would be shanking. Like they were.
This is a true story.
It is. I mean, it really happened.
This is a true story. This is when I had my software company. Exactly what he said. Upper management brought us in. We designed a real-time bill of material on a high output line. We thought we were going to get a ticker tape parade for nailing everything. We came back the next week, and they had taken the safeties off the staple gun, and it looked like a shooting range on the KPI board. For real.
So we didn't have an appreciation for the culture in the plant. We instituted a change, and they revolted. and it was
not floor buy-in.
There was a miss there. That was a total miss. And there wasn't anything to do about it after that horse had left the barn. That project was sunk. It's important to manage for that.
Okay. It created good business for you. It's one of the best technical implementations ever. Bridge to nowhere. It's kind of what you're trying to avoid. It's exactly what we're trying to avoid for all of us in our trade, right?
John, any other good stories from you?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't have one to compete with that, but I'm going to go back and reiterate a second, managing from the shop floor. So, recently we did a couple-week assessment at a supplier where we lived on the floor, basically. We said, we don't want a conference room. We want a table on your floor. We just want to be with the people that are doing the job every day. And that's it. Like, that's where the real information is going to come from, because everyone, and this isn't a negative thing, but management will say, we have this process, that process. We're prepared for that. But if the people on the floor don't know it and aren't trained in it, it comes back to bite you. And what ended up happening was, at the end of that assessment, we came back and we reported out to a few dozen people of what our feedback was. And I would say there was some, jaws on the floor about that can't really be happening. And what had been going on for 18 months, 2 years now, we were able to talk to them and say, hey, before you go to this next level of implementation, we do got to pump the brakes, because you're about to run, another multi-million-dollar check. And so what we're actually doing in 2 weeks with our partner and with Axiom is we got them to actually stop and say, let's take 2 weeks with all the subject matter experts from the machine company, from the software company, from the manufacturer, and now let's sit in a room for 2 weeks and actually map out what this is supposed to be, because now you're 18 months in without a plan. So it's critical now to have all the partners in place to avoid what we discussed earlier, whose account is it? Because ultimately, if you have the right partners and you can sell a total solution and actually deliver the results, right, then everyone wins. So,
everybody working together is the best way to do this,
Yeah.
even, because that's part of it, because going back to like an IT thing, we try to have remote access to our machines to where we can service from abroad or away from the machine and stuff. And there's a lot of times we just can't do that. We have to do odds and end things. We got to do something different. Not knowing that up front at the higher level that we can't do that drives us to a different way of getting to that point. So them are the types of questions that we're starting to ask is, can we get remote access? How do we get to that point? There's things like that we can go, which also goes back to what's happening on the shop floor and how do you get to that point? How do we get to that point to where we got to put cameras in, that type of stuff.
I think what I keep hearing is collaboration really matters, and the workforce shortage that we're hearing about in manufacturing is equally affecting the supply base, the professionals that wrap around your manufacturing process. We can't afford to have all the people to meet all the demand. We have to learn new ways of working together. We have just a few minutes left, so I guess I'd like to take any questions from the crowd. The kid in front, I guess.
How do you know? How do you know when to innovate and when to go with what's tried and true?
What do you think, guys?
I didn't hear it.
How do you know when? The question was, how do you know when to innovate? And maybe think about a lot of these startup companies that are out here, that some of whom you've seen propped up and contesting with each other, versus go with the tried and true.
I don't think innovation's the goal. I think success is the goal, and innovation's just the way you get there. And I'm sorry if that's fortune cookie.
No, I think it's what Dave said. What I think I heard you say is you need to know the market, right? So you've got to know what's available pre-built,
yep.
and when to assemble pre-built machinery or software versus you've got something that's unique. For us, the critical path is what is the process you're serving. That should dominate versus the technology you're going to utilize.
And innovation can actually be what you bring together, right? I mean, that really could be the aspect of it is like, pick this, and this. Wow, that's never saw that done before, so we can do this, right? So that's another type of innovation that you can get to into the same way of getting to that, calling that innovation, but using the old process or something.
Yeah, it's kind of like a jigsaw puzzle, right? Putting the right pieces together. Because what we deal with now when we go into these bigger players, the multi-billion-dollar players, they've all tried to, or many of them have tried to do homegrown systems. Like, hey, we're big enough, we're going to do it ourselves, which looks good in a vacuum until you expand and you're 5 years down the road and you can't, your system doesn't expand anymore. And so it's really, I like what you said, out of the box solutions when puzzled together to bring potentially an exponentially greater outcome, maybe better than starting and recreating the wheel.
We had another question back there.
Mark Veldoff, Envision IT. I'm a IT director for a manufacturing company. We also operate an MSP that has a lot of manufacturing, smaller manufacturing customers. A little closer? Is that better?
There we go.
All right. So we also have a lot of customers that are manufacturers and they're smaller organizations. What are the points that you guys see where IT, where you trip on IT, or where we don't play well together? Dave, you gave an example of that earlier. How do you get remote management? But what are some other examples of those that IT needs to be looking out for to help you guys do a better job?
I think the most common issue I see in small to medium customers is acquiring a new technology without planning for the internal resources to maintain it.
I think the second one is building it yourself, and we just talked about why that's a bad idea. I don't know that there's a particular order to those two, but they're both challenges.
who's best to facilitate that project, to own that project inside the organization? Is it the OT side? Is it the IT side? Is it another director inside the organization?
Yes.
Somebody's got to own it.
The guy who signs the check should own it, or the person who signs the check should own it, and they should set up appropriate milestones to make sure that the project's on track. But the business user should sign it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the best functioning organizations that I've seen, IT is a partner. IT is not a leader.
Yeah.
IT is, they know the technology and the right way to do things, but they should be listening to the business and they should be teamed with the business. But absolutely, they shouldn't be the one saying what the business needs.
And sorry, but I would say another part of that and what we pitch when we're going into business in this workshop I just mentioned a minute ago, we're having subject matter experts from all the departments you just mentioned and more. But what we talked to them about was everyone that's going to be in that room wants to protect their own turf, right? They're all biased, and that's natural. So where we're playing a key perspective is we're the neutral third party, right? We don't care at the end of the day. We want a successful outcome so that you pat us on the back and it leads to more business in the future. I think when you bring all those players together, the one writing the check should own it, but you still need a neutral third party kind of moderator to make sure that, you know, it's not being skewed in one direction or the next.
So I'm getting the hook sign from the back. So do we have one more question from the audience? Or if we don't, any last brilliant suggestions? Buy more stuff from all of these guys?
We're the dancers.
Collaboration is the one theme that's up here. And the more high-tech it gets, the more you need the human collaboration.
And with the customer too, right? I mean, it's through the whole process. It's trying to make that. It's trying to make partnerships is really what you're trying to do, and that's when things start to go smoother. That partnership, and you don't have this us versus them. You're working to get to that same point. That's the key to this whole thing.
So when you're picking your technology partner, make sure you like them.
Yep. Exactly.
They're decent to hang out with, because if you hate them, you're not going to collaborate with them.
Right.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us, listening in, and hopefully you got something out of that. And feel free to stick around, ask questions, and sign some checks for these guys.